talk about a women's history of the University of Chicago, you're talking about multiple vantage points, multiple experiences, people coming from all different places with all different kinds of expectations and career trajectories. So we wanted to be able to go into thinking about the history knowing something about what women were doing here, knowing something about the social world they live in, which we do know something about, but also respecting and acknowledging the unique character of the university, knowing that the history of women's education, as we know it broadly in the United States, is not going to be replicated in identical fashion in the University of Chicago. It's going to have its own peculiar University of Chicago character. And of course it does. For the past couple of years we've been working with special collections. The first thing to do was to say, where are we going to look? And in fact, if you look at the very back page of your catalog, you see an unbelievable number of collections that were consulted. Women are not the principal object of collection in these different things, but they're always in it, through it, participating in it, observing it. The one place that we found, both in our exhibit and in our oral histories, that women always felt themselves to be equal participants was in the classroom itself. Now, maybe not in graduate stipends, maybe not in the faculty discussion room, maybe not in the dorm, maybe not in the street, maybe not in any number of other places, but the classroom was very consistently mentioned as the place where people felt that they were recognized and that their contributions were recognized. There's a story that is actually often repeated among the oral histories that when the women are out on the stoops, sweeping the stoops in the morning, every other one of them has a PhD. So that was a kind of joke in the 1950s about the high level of education of faculty wives, and this was actually true. Faculty wives played a huge institutional role. They did a lot of service for the university. They did a lot of service for their husbands. They were an integral part of the university, but they had no proper official role. We have actually very extensive records of the faculty wives, and so we were able to tell a story about them. In the 1960s and 70s, no surprise, we have a very big change in the culture. Not only all the protests that's going on around the university and around the country, around civil rights and around the war, starts to also produce a women's movement. And in this movement, the students themselves started to think about what they considered equal terms. This kind of movement was not simply a political movement. It was a political movement that was also an intellectual movement. It was thinking about how do people think about, for example, core knowledge. What is it that you learn in the core? What are you being taught? Are you being taught any women? What place does gender have when you think about what is considered essential for your education? So they made up their own reading groups. They made up their own symposia. They had their own conferences. It was very much student-driven and student-generated. And I think the emphasis now is on not so much on trying to find what forms of symmetry there are, but also celebrating and exploring sexual difference and gender difference. And this is much more important for students today than thinking about how they can be treated equally, in part because their treatment is more equal. I can't say that it's 100% equal, but the issues that drove the earlier questions about gender that drove their mothers and aunts and sisters to put pressure on the university to change the institution, many of those things have been remedied.